So I just got off the phone with one of my friends who is a senior leader, actually like second level leader in a large and sophisticated organization on the East Coast of the United States. And made me want to pour a nice stiff bourbon to drink. But I waited until I could sit down and chat with you all just a little bit. He was in the middle of receiving input that came back to him from a 360-degree performance appraisal. Their company uses this system and has done so for years. And I could not help but get nervous and sick to my stomach while he was talking about the effects of this 360-degree performance appraisal. Maybe you use something like it. If you use a performance appraisal like this, the basic idea is that we want to know how we're doing. Now, not most of us want to know how we're doing, but we don't necessarily want to know how we're doing from everybody about everything. You know how that works. We want to get feedback, but we want to get it from the right people about the right stuff. And we also want to understand that feedback is just information. As soon as feedback goes beyond being information, now it's not feedback. Now it's advice, or it's coaching, or it's direction. Don't call it feedback if you're saying, here's what I experienced, and here's what you ought to do about it. You know what you ought to do? You ought to chew sugarless gum. As someone gives you advice, it's no longer feedback. Feedback is merely information. And then the person receiving the feedback can do whatever they want with it. So the purpose of performance appraisals in any form is to get feedback. And the purpose of this specific type of performance appraisal, called the 360-degree performance appraisal, is to get a bunch of feedback from a bunch of people. Now, I hope you can understand here, if you've never experienced one of these, that there are some flaws in this. You know that the best feedback I get is when I'm open to the feedback, when I want it, when I'm curious about it. And the best feedback I can get is when I get it from people who have something valuable to say, not just everyone. And I want to know specifically from that person over there how that impacted them, or how hard was that to do, or what was I like to work with under this or that circumstance. But I don't want to know from that person because they didn't experience it, or they were so out of the loop that they didn't have a clue what was going on. I want to know from that person. Most 360-degree performance appraisals or feedback systems are set up something like this. They're formalized. They sometimes go through HR or they go through an external source. And there's a form that a whole bunch of random people, people that report to me, for example, people that work with me directly as a peer, maybe if I'm in a situation where I have folks that I report to, they're all given this feedback form. And the person giving the feedback is supposed to fill that form out deeply and with great detail and anonymously. You see where I'm going with this, don't you? We were called in years ago to an organization that was a statewide organization up in the Pacific Northwest to help solve a tremendous amount of conflict, ill will, toxic culture stuff that had been going on. And at the root of it was the 360-degree performance process, where people who were irritated over there with this person over here were asked to give feedback about this person, and did so with great vitriol and anonymously. And then that's all sent to a centralized person who is supposed to kind of grab themes out of it. They're usually not very good at it. So what they do is grab everything that's being said and then wrap it in anonymity, and then they deliver this in some form to the person who's supposed to be receiving the feedback. What would you think if you got a bunch of anonymous feedback from people? You probably only work with 12, 24, maybe 36 people who would actually be able to give feedback. You're going to quickly find out that if a person gives positive feedback, you'll think, oh, okay, that's fine. They might not know how easy that was for me to do that or to be that way, so they're giving me this praise for something that comes naturally to me. Or if they give constructive criticism, Scotty, kind of feedback, then you'll say, wait a second, they didn't know this and they didn't know that, so that feedback is probably not very valuable. You know what else you'll do? you'll try to figure out who gave that feedback. And you'll think by the choice, the turn of phrase, by the things that were listed. Well, I think it was Janet who gave that feedback. Oh, and then your eyes will narrow and you'll be a little frustrated or irritated. Or if you're very sophisticated, you'll pretend that you're open to feedback, but probably down inside you're going, oh, that Janet. But if it wasn't Janet, maybe it was James. James could have been either of them. Now you got two people who gave anonymous feedback, and now you're suspicious about it. And they're not supposed to talk about that feedback either. They're kind of bound in that. So if you casually bring it up in conversation and it didn't come from them, they're not going to know what you're talking about. If it did come from them, most of the time, they're going to act like they don't know what you're talking about. You see what happens here? These anonymous 360-degree feedback systems actually create a lack of trust. They are the essence of systematized triangulation, where if I'm frustrated with Donnie sitting over there, instead of talking to Donnie, I talk to somebody else in hopes that a filtered version of that message will get back to Donnie and cause him to change his evil ways. Triangulation is the single most destructive behavior in a team, in a department, in a workplace. It is utterly destructive. I do it because I'm afraid and because I want a system that kind of keeps me safe and comfortable. And because I don't know how to directly talk with somebody when I'm frustrated about what they're doing or not doing. It's very destructive. A 360-degree performance evaluation, especially under the cloak of anonymity delivered by a third party to me, is triangulation run amok. Don't do it. Don't do it. Pull up. If you are implementing that in your organization, stop it. It is awful. Get people to communicate directly with one another. Get the right hand to know what the left hand is doing so that they can talk to one another, so that they can work well together. Well, they have a hard time. They don't know how to communicate very well. Then how on earth are they going to be able to perform when they're under pressure if they can't even talk about the most simple things about how your performance and behavior, or lack thereof, is affecting me? If we can't do that directly with one another, how on earth are we going to accomplish the great things that you have set out to accomplish? So, don't do it. Okay, but you're probably left wondering, we really do still need to see what people think, and maybe we're sophisticated enough that we're kind of spread out a little bit. We can't all be together. And maybe because of positional authority, it's harder for someone lower in the organization to tell somebody a rung up that their impact is not really good. And it's hard to deliver those messages. So we just want to be helpful. Well, be helpful specifically by getting people to communicate directly with one another. If you must do a 360-degree performance evaluation, get your notepad out, write this down. This will save your organization. Do what we have designed, what we call a modified 360-degree performance evaluation, if you must. Here's what we mean by that. If you are my direct supervisor and it's now time for me, that time of year, hopefully evaluations happen every day and every week and all day long, but if it's once a year when it's time for my performance evaluation, then you would sit down with me and say, here are the competencies that are a part of your job, and here are the skills that we wanted you to have, and here are the results we wanted you to be able to achieve. No surprise to me, that should be all known to me. A shorthand way of describing that is, here are the expectations that you have of me. And we're all on the same page with that. And then you would ask me, who are 4, 5, or 6 people that you would like to hear from about these expectations? And maybe you could zoom in even a little bit. You could say expectation 1 and 2 and 6. They kind of go together. Who are 4, 5, 6 people that you would like to hear from about how you did in those areas and about what it was like to work with you? You'd ask me, and I'd say, well, I want to hear from these people about that. And then about these expectations, I want to hear from those people. About those expectations, I want to hear from that group of people. You'll listen to that, and you need to be thinking, does that give a rounded view? You might add one or two other people to the group. You might say, hey, Dee, I want you to hear from these other two people as well. Does that work for you? Sure, that works. Or I might say, one of them works well, but the other one, their perspective is so off, but you can get a better perspective by talking to that person. What's driving this now is I want to know what my impact on my team members is, and on those that I lead and those that I serve and those that I work with. I want to know, and I want it to be out in the open. And so what this does then is everyone is told, Dee has asked to hear from you specifically about these 5 or 6 questions around these 2 or 3 competencies. He's going to know it comes from you. Make sure you're telling that person that you are direct and frank. And if there's anything you're going to write that you have not spoken directly to him, make sure you do that before you write it down. That person might be very uncomfortable with this. It's very possible that they have lived in a world of triangulation where they've never been able to directly communicate behavior and impact and outcome to anybody, especially not at work, especially with someone with a formidable personality like mine. All right, so that might be uncomfortable for them. Teach them how to do it, because I need to know what my strengths are and what the impact of my strengths are and what my weaknesses are and how we can moderate those weaknesses, how we can work together. I need to know my impact on you. And you may not always tell me, or you may have thought it but never really formalized it, never really put it into something that's helpful for me. Then there's also a lot of folks who really don't even know what their strengths are. So I might be one of those folks. I just put my head down and go, and I don't understand what my strengths are. It just comes naturally to me. I think it's common sense. Everyone does that. I need to know that stuff, but I should be in a position where I want to know that stuff. Your job is to help me want to know that stuff. And one of the ways to do that is to help me pick the people that I hear from. Your job also is to notice where I've got blind spots. That is, it's possible that I don't want to hear about that theme from anyone, okay? Well, work on that with me so that you develop some curiosity with me and you get some feedback, some information from very specific people. That's a modified 360-degree performance appraisal. What do you want to hear from, or what do you want to hear about, and who do you want to hear from? And it's all out in the open, and it's written, and then you can present that to me, or the group could present that to me, and it is usually a very, very positive way to go. In fact, what it ends up doing is give me a little bit better perspective. It teaches me to make sure I communicate directly with folks. It teaches the folks in the organization that we value direct communication over triangulation, and that we value continual improvement and growth, because nobody is like a fixed piece of concrete. We're actually more like trees. We can grow and change and bend with the wind. This is one of the most effective ways we've ever found to create really, really good performance management conversations and performance appraisals. But clear upstream from that, make sure that you are developing an organization populated with people who are curious about how things really are, not people who always want to be right. So if you've got people like that, it's much easier for them to have already had many of those conversations themselves. Then in a formalized process, it's actually a really, really cool experience that bonds people together rather than driving them apart. So if you and I talk on the phone about your performance appraisals and how you do it, listen in the background, because I might actually pick up a bottle of bourbon and pop the cork while you're talking and think, wow, this is rough. I better sit down and light a cigar and have a bourbon on this one, because these people are galloping off the cliff with 360-degree performance appraisals. They're offy. Modify them so that they increase direct communication. They don't allow people to hide behind a system. Never works, no matter how complex your organization is, no matter how sophisticated or spread out it is. That indirect system-style communication does not work when it comes to my continual improvement. Well, I hope that was helpful for you. Man, it's sure been helpful for us. We've applied it everywhere, and we've taught other people how to do it with great results. If this was helpful for you, you know the drill. Hit that like button down below. That tells me, and it tells the rest of us on our team here, that that's something you appreciated and you want to know more about it. You can also pop into the comments and tell us what you think about this, because I'm quite curious. And I read those comments, and so I'll be able to know directly what you think, and I'll know it came from you. Also, hit the bell, because that'll let you know that that there's new stuff coming out for you. And share it if you feel like it. If there's somebody you know who is in that morass of 360-degree performance appraisals and they love them and they pet the fur off of them and they think it's a wonderful thing, send them this. You'll probably tick them off a little bit, but it'd be kind of fun. Anyway, hey, your job is hard. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. But keep up the good work. Here's to you.